Hello, family and friends. This process leading up to the Westmount SDA reunion has enabled me to meet some remarkable people that have come through the church. And the next figure I'm about to introduce to you is yet another example. His name is Dr. Wayne Lamar Greaves, an original native of Barbados who migrated to Montreal back in the 1970s. He would go on to study and graduate in medicine at McGill University, would then go on to do his visiting fellowship in infectious diseases at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and would eventually even become a professor at the HBCU University, Howard University in Washington, D.C. He has always had strong ties to the church, and particularly to Westmount. He's played a role in the preparation, the planning, the marketing of this homecoming reunion. He's been a faithful member, serving as a Bible teacher, a Sabbath school Bible teacher at his home church, Home of the Oranges in New Jersey, and continues to do wonderful things for the Lord. He's married. He found his sweetheart, would you believe, at the Westmount SDA Church, Admiral Lou Greaves, and has two wonderful children. So at this point in time, I'm going to introduce to you a man that I truly revere in a conversation that I had with him recently, Dr. Wayne Lamar Greaves. Well, Dr. Greaves, it's a pleasure to speak with you this evening, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to introduce you as one of the early members at Westmount SDA Adventist Church. I want us to roll back the hands of time and go back to the 1970s. I suspect it was the 1970s when you became one of the members at the church. Tell us about the early years of the Westmount SDA Adventist Church and its migration from the bottom of the hill in Westmount on Green Avenue to the top of the hill.
Yeah. So I came as a late teenager, if you will, to Montreal and came there to go to school to McGill.
Okay.
And it was really a comforting place to know the Green Avenue Church, as it was then called the Westmount Church on Green Avenue. Okay. And it was not only for myself, but there were other international students who had come to go to McGill who ended up coming to the church. So when I was there was someone from Africa, someone from Europe, but it was like a place of solace, a place of family away from home. I just felt so welcomed. I will never forget it because as a young person, my first trip far away from home, there was a sense of being lost and loneliness, but the church members, I had one family member, but it was mostly the church members who rallied around the students in general, and myself as well. So I think we were there for a couple of years. Pastor Parchment was the pastor at that time.
Okay.
And after a while, it was clear that we were outgrowing that location. And there was the gradual migration up the hill, as you say, into Westmount proper.
Okay.
And that was quite a transition. We had the pastor that came after Pastor Parchment, Pastor Green, and then there were transitioning difficulties, but we eventually made it. And then Pastor Sams came on the scene, and that was a real move ahead, a real forward movement that occurred. But if I could just go back to Westmount at the Green Avenue Church for a minute, some of the fondest memories I have there was of the Sabbath school. Okay. And the Sabbath school leaders, the Ford brothers, Sion Ford and Alfred Greaves. They were really very welcoming. Then the other nice thing that developed at that time was that there was a youth choir run by Myrna Springer, and that galvanized the younger folks in the church. It was just a really good, warm experience.
It's hard for people in this generation to understand how few people of color were there, whether they were Caribbean, African, Haitian. Can you give us an idea of how different the cultural community scene was in Montreal back in those days?
That's a very good point you make. The church at that time was predominantly white, but gradually there were, because of migration, there were more and more Black folks coming in, mostly from the Caribbean, a few from Africa, but primarily from the Caribbean. And by the time we moved from the Green Avenue Church to the Stanley Church, before it was renamed the Westmount Church,
Yes.
there was a tremendous change in the composition of the church, where it moved from predominantly being a white church, quote unquote, to really a Black church, if you will, with very few white members that either moved on, moved out, and a few had passed away. But yeah, there was a real transition. By the time we were in Westmount, it was essentially a church that was, I'd say, 95% perhaps Black.
And also another interesting difference or distinction in those days is that Montreal was also a very dynamic city. It was growing. People felt that there was opportunities economically here. So I guess that kind of, I guess the church was the beneficiary of that as well, because people felt good about their futures and about their options, and then families started to emerge in the church. So I think it's a very different vibe and a very different feeling from today's situation.
Yeah, I think in those days, the church was seen as a place of refuge, a place of solace, a place where you could find solidarity as more and more Black people came together. And particularly in the Westmount area, I mean, it was almost unique. Here we were perched in an upper middle class or upper class society, almost an anachronism in that setting. And so there were some little, issues here and there when we first started. But I think people saw this as a real icon in the community. Black people saw this as a real testament to where we could be, what we could do, what we could become. And the fact that there were more and more people coming together, I mean, the growth of the church was significant, moving from the Green Avenue Church to the Westmount Church on top of the hill, as you called it.
Yes.
So the sense of togetherness, a sense of solidarity, and sense of unity, all those things I think helped to galvanize the group into a real force.
Now, it's amazing to see how even your life journey went from being a teenager who was enjoying the resources of the church to becoming a physician and a very respectable one. Could you tell us about the journey that you went in, and how maybe the spiritual and the social components of the church helped put you in a position to be very successful?
Yeah, so I think that even before I came to Montreal, it was deeply ingrained in my fiber, if you will, by my parents, to seek the kingdom of God first, and everything else will come afterwards. And that has always been my mantra. I was never really distracted by secular stuff. I knew why I was here. My parents, in particular, my father, had really sacrificed for me to be able to come. Even though I had a scholarship, that was still not enough. So I was very focused. And at the same time, I had a cousin who was already at the church. I had a few other friends that I developed from Barbados, Ross Boyd and Tony Griffith. And then there were others who were also in school. And as I mentioned earlier, the international students who come who were at McGill. So there was, I don't want to say quite a camaraderie, because those other international students were largely older than I was, but there was a sense of purpose and a sense of focus. So it kept me on track, both in terms of my educational focus, but also my spiritual focus. And I got very involved in church activities, which I think is another key that helps to keep people really on track when it comes to your spiritual journey, by being involved.
I see. Well, I played a role in the AY department. I dabbled in the youth choir. What departments did you serve at Westmount Church?
So I also was involved in the AY group at one point. I was also a Sabbath school teacher.
Okay.
I was involved in the health ministry. Sister Lee was a real icon at that time. We worked very closely together.
Yes.
And I also did a little bit in Pathfinders. Sister Bellon was here.
Okay.
And that was a very interesting time dealing with some of the teens in the group. I'm sure they remember me as being a very strict counselor. But that was great. That was very good.
You've seen a lot of Seventh-day Adventist churches around North America and, in fact, around the world. What would you, or how would you characterize or distinguish Westmount from other churches?
So you're right. The Westmount Church really stands out because of the warmth and support and the, how should I say, family-like nature of that environment. Although I've gone to many churches, and the one where I attend now, Church of the Oranges in New Jersey, is quite good, it still doesn't replicate the sense of togetherness, the sense of support. One thing that stands out, for example, is when I was a student there in the early days, on Sabbaths after church, someone would take me home for lunch just about every week. I mean, it was incredible. The difference here in the US, for example, in some of the churches, is that people tend to have potlucks. I mean, that's great, but it doesn't have the same, close-knit feeling. You don't feel quite as special. I think in the Westmount Church, I felt special, and many other students felt special because of the care that was shown us and the love that was shown us by many other members in the church. So that will always be a memory for the Westmount Church. The other memory that I have that is fun in terms of social networking and support has to do with the church picnics. Church picnics were a big, big deal. I mean, we would load up and get on a bus. We'd go to Long Sioux Park or Ami du Camper across in Hemingford. People look forward to those events. And in those days, people were more willing to get onto a bus than to drive their individual cars. So there's, again, a sense of togetherness and almost like a big family. It was great. We had a good time at the picnics, playing cricket, even with the pastor. Pastor Sams came along around that time. It was a lot of fun, really a lot of fun.
And do you believe that a lot of that that togetherness and sharing those kinds of experiences was tied to leadership of the church, or was it just the composition of the church membership where there was such a bond and friendship among the members?
I think it's both. I think the leadership had something to do with it. The leaders were there with us. As I said, the pastors like Pastor Sam's, they were right there playing with us, playing on the ground. So that was one thing. But I think the general attitude of people during that era was different. I think we've become now a more somewhat isolated society where people are more looking out for themselves and getting ahead. There's not as much willingness to share, in my opinion, and not the same sense of camaraderie and fellowship. It's there, but not to the same extent, in my opinion. And I see it here where I am in the US as well. People are now, I think, more focused on themselves and less so on what we will call, quote unquote, church unity and bonding. There is some of it, but to me, it's quite a different society and quite a different world. You can sit at home and play your video games and never go outside, never interact with a real person. There is such a move to the virtual reality that reality in itself seems to be slowly slipping by the wayside.
Yes. Well, hopefully the church can make some adaptation to continue to be a relevant component in people's lives. I want to ask you, as you recollect on some of those fondest memories, are there one or two particular individuals or events or experiences that even today you remember fondly and smile?
Well, I can't forget Sister Lee, Mary Lee.
Yes.
I mean, she was just an icon, a fixture in the church. She'd made sure you walked the straight and narrow way. But she meant well, and she was a real force within the church in general, and in the health ministry setting in particular. And then I think of Sister Walton. She was a woman who was ahead of her time, really wanted the best, had a vision for how things should be done well, and really stood out. And then, of course, there's Pastor Sams, who was a great leader, who really, I think, took the church to another level.
Yes.
Those are some of the outstanding individuals. I'm sure there are others, if I think long enough about them, but those are the ones that come to mind immediately.
As I conclude, I just want to speak now as we move 50 years ahead, 2023. What do you think can still be achieved with the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church today in the city of Montreal, in the city of Westmount?
I didn't quite hear the first part of your question, kind of.
Yes. No, I'm still wondering if in today's context for the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church, under the direction and leadership of Pastor Hopeton Cousins and its current membership, which is different from yesterday, what do you think, or how can it best serve the Montreal area, the faith-based communities, the Caribbean communities, and even the city of Westmount?
Yeah. So I think the church needs to move away from being a group of people inside a brick building and get into the community. So the more activities that we can develop that draws the community in, I think the better off we will be. We can't be so isolated. We need to become involved in more issues, even social justice issues. But music is another very important area that we can tap into because that's relatively non-threatening. And it's so easy to be able to make friends through music. Maybe there's also an opportunity for some types of physical activities or events. But to me, music is a really important way to reach out. Social service groups and social networking, I think, are things that we need to do. We can't be content to just think of going to church and going to a building. To me, we will not reach others if we take that road. If we keep taking that road as we have so far in the past, we need to be moving out. And I think the future really lies in the hands of the younger people who are adept at social media interactions.
Yes.
It's not enough, but it is a real introit. You still need, I think, to get back to where you can have face-to-face conversations and actually meetups. But then there can be small events. It doesn't need to be a big thing.
Yes.
But I keep saying that engagement is important. Health ministry is another area to get to the community. That's another important, non-threatening way to reach out to others in the community. So if I had to put my money on two ways that we can move forward, it will be health ministry and music ministry.
Okay, excellent. Well, Dr. Greaves, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm glad that we've had an opportunity to build some sort of relationship through this process of building these homecoming reunion events.
I look forward to it. I wish I could be there, but I wish you all the best, and I'm sure it's going to be a great event, even surpassing the one we had before.
I certainly hope so. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you to you too.
Okay, bye-bye.